The house was too quiet now. Eleanor sat at the edge of her worn armchair. The one she'd bought with Harold 30 years ago when they'd moved into this modest two-story home in Willow Creek. The ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway was the only sound, each second a reminder of the emptiness that had crept into her life. At 70, she felt like a ghost haunting her own home unseen, unheard, forgotten. It hadn't always been this way. Once, this house had been alive with laughter, with the clatter of dishes during Sunday dinners, with the voices of her children, Michael and Sarah, arguing over board games or sneaking cookies from the jar. Harold's deep chuckle would fill the gaps, grounding them all. But Harold had been gone for 8 years now, taken by a heart attack that came without warning. The children had grown, moved away, built their own lives. Eleanor understood. She'd raised them to be independent, to chase their dreams. But understanding didn't fill the silence. She stood, her knees creaking, and shuffled to the kitchen. The fridge hummed softly, stocked with more food than she could eat alone. She pulled out a carton of milk, then paused, staring at the expiration date. 2 weeks from now. Would she even be here by then? The thought had been growing. A seed planted months ago when she first realized how invisible she'd become. It started small. The neighbors, once friendly, now offered only curt nods as they hurried past. At the community center, where she volunteered twice a week, younger folks spoke over her, their eyes sliding past as if she were part of the furniture. Even her children got how she loved them called less often. Michael was always swamped with work in Chicago. Sarah, juggling her twins in Seattle, promised to visit soon. Soon never came. Eleanor poured the milk into a mug, heated it in the microwave, and stirred in cocoa. The warmth of the drink did little to thaw the chill in her chest. She thought of the last family gathering, 2 Christmases ago. Michael had spent half the night on his phone. Sarah had been distracted by the kids, and Eleanor had sat at the head of the table, smiling, serving, unnoticed. She'd spoken up once, sharing a story about Harold's old fishing trips. But the conversation had shifted before she finished. She'd felt like a shadow, fading into the background of her own life. The phone rang, startling her. She set the mug down and hurried to answer, her heart lifting with a flicker of hope. Maybe it was Sarah, or Michael, calling to check in. But it was only a robocall. Something about car insurance she didn't need. She hung up, her hands trembling. That was when the idea solidified. Sharp and clear, she couldn't stay here anymore. Eleanor had always been practical. She'd raised 2 kids on a teacher's salary, managed the household when Harold's construction jobs were unsteady, and kept going after his death. But practicality wasn't enough now. She needed to feel alive again, to be seen, to matter. The house, the town, the routines, they were anchors, but not the kind that steadied her. They were dragging her under. She spent the next week sorting through her life. She started with the attic, pulling out boxes of old photos, letters, and trinkets. Each item carried a memory. The locket Harold gave her on their 10th anniversary, Michael's first pair of soccer cleats, Sarah's finger-painted Mother's Day card. She allowed herself to linger, to cry, but she didn't stop. She sorted what to keep, what to donate, what to sell. The locket stayed. The furniture could go. By the end of the month, she'd hired an estate agent. The house was listed, and within days, a young couple made an offer. They loved the charm of the place, the wraparound porch, the oak tree in the backyard where Michael had once built a fort. Eleanor signed the papers without hesitation. The money would be enough to start over, wherever that might be. She didn't tell anyone. Not her children. Not her neighbors. not the women at the community center who barely remembered her name. She packed a single suitcase clothes, a few books, the locket, and a journal she hadn't written in since Harold died. The rest she sold or gave away. The process was strangely liberating, like shedding a skin that no longer fit. On the final morning, Eleanor stood in the empty living room, the walls bare, the floors echoing her steps. She ran her fingers along the mantel, where photos of her family had once stood. She didn't feel regret, only a quiet resolve. She was done being invisible. She picked up her suitcase, locked the door, and walked to the bus station without looking back. The bus to Portland was nearly empty. Eleanor chose a seat by the window, watching Willow Creek fade into the distance. She didn't know where she was going next, not exactly. But for the first time in years, she felt the weight of possibility. She was 70. Yes, but she wasn't done living. Not yet. Portland was a blur of rain and neon lights when Eleanor arrived. The bus station smelled of damp concrete and coffee, and she stood for a moment, clutching her suitcase, feeling the pulse of a city that didn't know her. It was exhilarating and terrifying. She'd chosen Portland because it was far enough from Willow Creek to feel like a new world, but not so far that she couldn't return if she needed to. Not that she planned to. She found a small motel near the river, its sign flickering in the dusk. The clerk, a young man with a nose ring and a kind smile, didn't rush her as she fumbled with her wallet. "First time in Portland?" he asked, handing her a key. She nodded, surprised by his curiosity. "You'll like it here," he said. "Lots to see." It was the first time in months someone had spoken to her like she mattered. Her room was modest but clean, with a single bed and a window overlooking the water. Eleanor unpacked her suitcase, placing the locket on the nightstand. She opened her journal. The pages yellowed from neglect, and wrote, "Day 1. I'm here. I don't know what comes next, but I'm not invisible today." The act of writing felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. The next morning, she wandered the city. Portland was alive in a way Willow Creek never had been. Street musicians played under awnings. Food carts lined the sidewalks, and people moved with purpose, even in the rain. Eleanor bought a coffee from a cart, savoring the warmth of the cup in her hands. The barista, a woman in her 30s with bright blue hair, complimented her scarf. "That's a beautiful color on you," she said. Eleanor touched the green wool, a gift from Sarah years ago, and smiled. It was a small thing, but it felt like a spark. She spent days exploring, letting the city guide her. She visited Powell's books, losing herself in aisles of novels and poetry. She sat in parks, watching families and couples, feeling less alone in their presence. At a farmer's market, she bought a loaf of sourdough and a jar of blackberry jam, chatting with the vendor about recipes. Each interaction was a thread, weaving her back into the world. But the loneliness lingered, a quiet ache. At night, in the motel, she'd lie awake, wondering if she'd made a mistake. She hadn't told Michael or Sarah she'd left. They'd find out eventually, when they called the house and got no answer, or when the new owners moved in. She wasn't sure why she hadn't reached out. Maybe it was pride, or fear they wouldn't care. Maybe it was because she needed this journey to be hers alone. One evening, she stumbled across a community center advertising a book club for seniors. She hesitated, then signed up. The first meeting was awkward. Eleanor wasn't used to being the new person. But the group, a mix of men and women in their 60s and 70s, welcomed her warmly. They were reading The Nightingale, and the discussion was lively, filled with laughter and debates. Eleanor spoke up, sharing her thoughts on the character's resilience. To her surprise, people listened. One woman, Clara even asked her to stay for tea afterward. Clara was a retired nurse, widowed like Eleanor, with a sharp wit and a penchant for knitting. They bonded over stories of their husbands, their children, the lives they'd built and lost. "You're brave. You know," Clara said one afternoon, her needles clicking. "Leaving everything behind like that. Most people wouldn't dare." Eleanor shrugged, but the word stayed with her. Brave. Was that what she was? Through Clara, Eleanor met others. There was Tom, a former carpenter who taught woodworking classes, and Lila, who organized outings to local theaters. They invited her to join them. And slowly, Eleanor found herself part of something. She started volunteering at the center, helping with events, sharing her love of books. For the first time in years, she felt seen. But the past wasn't done with her. One morning, her phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Mom, where are you? The house is sold." Her heart sank. She'd known this moment would come, but it still felt like a reckoning. She typed a reply, then deleted it. What could she say? That she'd felt invisible, that she'd needed to find herself again. Instead, she turned off the phone and went for a walk, the rain cool against her face. The rain didn't stop in Portland, and neither did Eleanor's new routine. She'd wake early, make coffee in the motel's small kitchenette, and head to the community center. There, she'd help set up for classes or events. Her hands busy, her mind engaged. She'd started teaching a memoir writing workshop, inspired by her own journal. The participants, mostly older women like her, poured their lives onto the page stories of love, loss, and survival. Eleanor found herself in their words, their strength mirroring her own. But Michael's text haunted her. She hadn't responded, and neither had he followed up. Sarah hadn't reached out at all. Eleanor wondered if they were angry, or worse, indifferent. The thought gnawed at her, but she pushed it down, focusing on the life she was building. She'd rented a small apartment near the center, a one-bedroom with a view of the river. It was simple, but it was hers. She hung a single photo on the wall, her and Harold on their wedding day, both beaming, unaware of the years ahead. Clara became her anchor. They'd meet for coffee or walks, sharing stories that grew deeper with each conversation. Clara had lost her husband to cancer a decade ago, and her only son lived in Australia, rarely visiting. "You learn to make your own family," Clara said one day, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Eleanor nodded, understanding. The community center had become that familiar patchwork of souls who'd found each other in the quiet years of life. One afternoon, Tom invited her to his woodworking shop. He was a gruff man, his hands scarred from years of work. But his kindness showed in small ways, the way he listened, the way he carved tiny animals for the center's fundraiser. He showed her how to sand a cedar plank, guiding her hands with patience. "You've got a steady hand," he said, and Eleanor blushed, feeling like a schoolgirl. It wasn't romance not yet, but it was connection, and that was enough. Her memoir class grew, drawing a few younger participants, including a woman named Mia, a 30-something librarian with a quiet intensity. Mia's stories were raw, filled with the pain of a fractured childhood, and Eleanor found herself mentoring her, offering gentle feedback. "You see me," Mia said once, after a session. Not many people do. The words hit Eleanor hard. She'd spent so long feeling unseen. Yet here she was, helping someone else feel visible. Still, the silence from her children weighed on her. One evening, she sat at her new kitchen table, the locket in her hands. She opened it, revealing a tiny photo of Michael and Sarah as kids, their faces smeared with ice cream. She wanted to call them, to explain. But fear stopped her. What if they didn't understand? What if they confirmed her worst fear that she didn't matter to them? Instead, she wrote. Her journal filled with entries about Portland, about Clara and Tom, about the woman she was becoming. She wrote about Willow Creek, too, about the house that had held her life, about Harold's laugh, about the moment she decided to leave. Writing was her way of making sense of it all, of claiming her story. One day, at the community center, she overheard a conversation about a local art exhibit. The theme was reinvention, and artists were invited to submit work inspired by personal transformation. Eleanor hesitated, then signed up. She wasn't an artist, but she had her words. She spent nights crafting a piece for the exhibit, a prose poem about leaving Willow Creek, about shedding the weight of invisibility. When she read it to Clara, her friend's eyes welled up. "You have to share this," Clara said. "It's beautiful." The exhibit was held in a small gallery downtown, its walls lined with paintings, sculptures, and photographs. Eleanor's piece was displayed on a simple black frame, her words printed in elegant font. She stood beside it, nervous, as strangers read her story. A man in his 50s approached her, his face kind. "This is powerful," he said. "It feels honest." Eleanor thanked him, her throat tight. For the first time, she felt her story mattered. But as she left the gallery, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was Sarah. The message was short. "Mom, please call me. We're worried." Eleanor's heart raced. She stood on the sidewalk, the city alive around her, and realized she couldn't run forever. She had to face them. Eleanor stared at Sarah's message for a long time, the screen glowing in the dim light of her apartment. The words "were worried" felt like a lifeline and a weight. She wanted to call, to hear her daughter's voice. But something held her back, pride, perhaps, or the fear of reopening wounds she'd only just begun to heal. She set the phone down and turned to her journal, letting the words carry her instead. The next day, she met Clara for lunch at a cafe near the river. The air was crisp, the leaves turning gold under Portland's gray sky. Clara sensed her unease and pressed her gently. "You can't keep avoiding them, Elle," she said, stirring her tea. "They're your kids. They deserve to know why you left." Eleanor nodded, but the words felt stuck. How could she explain the ache of being unseen, the need to reclaim herself? She threw herself into her routine to distract herself. The memoir class was thriving, and she'd started helping Tom with his woodworking classes, sanding planks and organizing tools. The work grounded her, gave her purpose. One afternoon, as they worked side by side, Tom shared his own story. He'd lost his wife to Alzheimer's, watching her fade over years. "I thought I'd disappear too," he said, his voice low. "But you find ways to keep going." Eleanor met his eyes, seeing her own resilience reflected back. The art exhibit had sparked something in her. She began writing more, not just in her journal, but for herself, poems, essays, fragments of memory. She submitted a piece to a local literary magazine, and to her shock, they accepted it. The editor, a young woman named Rachel, invited her for coffee to discuss future submissions. "Your voice is so clear," Rachel said. "It's like you're speaking for everyone who's ever felt overlooked." Eleanor felt a warmth spread through her, a sense of being known. But Sarah's message lingered. A week later, Michael called. She let it go to voicemail, her heart pounding. His voice was strained, confused. "Mom, we went to the house. It's gone. Where are you? Please, just let us know you're okay." The guilt was sharp, like a blade. She'd wanted to be seen, But had she made them feel invisible instead? She finally called Sarah back that evening, her hands shaking as she dialed. Sarah answered on the second ring, her voice a mix of relief and frustration. "Mom, what's going on? Why didn't you tell us?" Eleanor took a breath, then let it out the whole story. The loneliness, the silence, the way Willow Creek had made her feel like a ghost. Sarah listened, quiet at first, then tearful. "I didn't know you felt that way," she said. "Why didn't you say anything?" "I tried," Eleanor said softly, "but I didn't know how to make you hear me." The call ended with a promise to talk again soon. But Eleanor felt the distance between them, a gap she wasn't sure how to bridge. She met Michael in person a week later. He flew to Portland, his face drawn when he saw her at the airport. They sat in a quiet diner, and he apologized, his voice thick. "I got so caught up in my life. Mom, I didn't see what you were going through." Eleanor reached for his hand, her heart aching. She didn't want their guilt, she wanted their presence. They spent the day together, walking the city, talking about Harold, about the past. Michael promised to visit more, to call, to listen. Eleanor believed him, but she also knew she couldn't go back to who she'd been. Portland had changed her, given her a new skin. She wasn't the woman who'd sat silently at the Christmas table anymore. That night, she wrote in her journal, "I was invisible, but I'm not anymore. Not to them, not to myself." She felt the weight of her choices, the pain she'd caused, but also the strength she'd found. She wasn't done rebuilding, but she was on her way. Eleanor's life in Portland settled into a rhythm, but it wasn't without its cracks. Her days were filled with the community center, her writing, and her growing circle of friends. Clara and Tom were constants, their presence a steady hum of comfort. She'd even started joining Lila's theater outings, losing herself in the magic of live performances. But her children's voices, Michael's promises, Sarah's tearful apologies echoed in her mind, a reminder of the family she'd left behind. She began writing letters to them, not to send, but to understand her own heart. In one, she wrote to Sarah, "I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I needed to love myself again." To Michael, "You were always my rock, but I needed to be my own." The act of writing was cathartic, a way to untangle the guilt and hope she carried. Her memoir class had become a haven. The stories her students shared were raw, powerful tales of survival, of reinvention. She saw herself in them, in their quiet courage. Mia, the librarian, had become a friend, often staying late to talk about books or life. "You're like a lighthouse," Mia said once. "You guide us without even realizing it." Eleanor laughed, but the words stayed with her, a reminder that her presence mattered. One morning, Clara suggested they take a trip to the coast. "You need to see the ocean," she said. "It puts everything in perspective." They drove to Cannon Beach. Eleanor, Clara, and Tom, the car filled with laughter and old jazz tunes. The beach was wild, the waves crashing against Haystack Rock, the air sharp with salt. Eleanor stood at the water's edge, her shoes off, the cold sand grounding her. She felt small against the vastness of the sea, but not insignificant. She felt alive. Back in Portland, she threw herself into a new project, a book of essays about aging, about finding meaning in the later years. She worked late into the night, her apartment lit by a single lamp, her words spilling onto the page. The literary magazine published another piece, and Rachel, the editor, encouraged her to keep going. "You're telling a story people need to hear," she said. Eleanor began to believe it. Sarah visited a month later, bringing her twins. The kids, 5 years old and bursting with energy, filled Eleanor's apartment with noise and joy. They painted together, their small hands smearing colors across paper, and Eleanor felt a warmth she hadn't known in years. Sarah watched, her eyes soft. "I'm sorry, Mom," she said one night, after the kids were asleep. "I should have been there." Eleanor hugged her, feeling the weight of their shared history. "You're here now?" she said. Michael came too, a few weeks later. He helped her hang shelves in the apartment, his hands steady like Harold's had been. They talked about the future, about visits, about rebuilding. Eleanor didn't ask for promises. She knew life was too messy for that. But she felt the shift, the slow mending of their bond. Her book took shape, each essay a piece of her journey. She wrote about Willow Creek, about the house she'd left, about the courage it took to start over. She wrote about invisibility, not just hers, but everyone's. The way society looks past the old, the quiet, the grieving. She poured her heart into it, hoping it might reach someone else who felt unseen. The community center hosted a reading for her book when it was finished. The room was packed. Clara, Tom, Mia, Rachel, even Sarah and Michael, who'd flown in for the event. Eleanor stood at the podium, her voice steady, and read her words. The applause was warm, but it was the faces attentive move that mattered most. She wasn't invisible anymore. The book was published a year later, a slim volume titled Visible Again. It wasn't a bestseller, but it found its readers, people like Eleanor, who'd felt the world turn away from them. She received letters from strangers, thanking her for giving voice to their silence. Each one was a reminder that her story, her life, had weight. She stayed in Portland, her apartment now filled with books, photos, and small gifts from friends. Clara and Tom remained her anchors, their friendship a quiet strength. She and Tom had grown closer, not in a romantic way, but in a deep, unspoken understanding. They'd sit together in his workshop, sanding wood, talking about life. "You've built something here," he said once, gesturing to the shelves they'd made. Eleanor knew he meant more than the furniture. Her children became a regular part of her life again. Sarah visited every few months, the twins trailing behind, their laughter filling the gaps Eleanor had once feared would never close. Michael called weekly, his voice lighter now, and he'd started sending her articles about Portland's history, knowing her love for learning. They didn't talk about Willow Creek often, but when they did, it was with tenderness, not pain. Eleanor kept writing, her journal a constant companion. She filled it with new stories, trips to the coast, nights at the theater, moments with her friends. She wrote about aging, not as a decline, but as a becoming. She was 72 now, her hair fully silver, her face lined with stories, but she felt more herself than ever. One spring morning, she returned to Willow Creek, not to stay, but to see it one last time. The new owners had painted the house blue, and the oak tree still stood, its branches heavy with leaves. She stood on the sidewalk, her heart full but not heavy. She'd left this place to find herself, and she had. Back in Portland, she organized a community center event, a celebration of stories, where everyone, young and old, shared their own. The room was alive with voices, each one heard, each one seen. Eleanor watched from the back, her locket warm against her chest. She thought of Harold, of the life they'd built, of the woman she'd become without him. Her final journal entry that year read, "I was invisible once, but I chose to be seen. Not by others, but by myself." And that was enough. She closed the book, set it on the shelf, and stepped into the world she'd made, a world where she belonged.